Welcome to the Chemical Burrito YouTube channel. Today we are going to look a little bit more closely at the Anbernic RG556 handheld. This is more of a review than my last video because the last video was really kind of a first impressions. I'd just gotten it out of the box, played a few games, only spent maybe like an hour or two messing around with it. So I've had this handheld for a little while now, and I'm going to give a little bit more detailed thoughts on it. But before we do that, what's the Anbernic 556 good for? Let's do some games. So, the kind of games I really like from the old PS1, PS2 days are the space sims. So I figured I would load one of those up today. Colony Wars was probably the best space sim series on the original PlayStation.
Enemy presence detected.
I see him on my scanner. Let's get him.
Additional enemy fighters have been detected in the area.
This gets more fun by the minute.
Civilian convoy. We are taking unsustainable damage here. We must destroy those fighters.
You are targeting friendly craft. Area clear. Mission complete. Return to base. Commencing jump sequence.
As you can see, the graphics upscale look pretty good on this game. Can't really see it myself under the under the lights here, but the upscaling looks really nice. Colony Wars, this is running on Duck Station, and the controls work pretty well. The joysticks are a little on the you might say sensitive side, but this is pretty common with all these handhelds that have these small sticks. When I'm actually holding the handheld properly instead of holding it under the camera, it actually is pretty easy to control the ship in Colony Wars and games like that. And the handheld is certainly powerful enough to upscale a lot of your PlayStation 2 games as well as PlayStation 1. So here is Battlestar Galactica running in 2x resolution on Nether SX2. As you can see, it looks pretty good. It is 30 frames per second. There's a 60 frame per second patch out there. I haven't had an opportunity to try on here. Works pretty well on the Odin. But game looks good here. It runs at the frame rate it's supposed to, at least on the original PS2. So games look pretty good on here. The ones that will run, and like I said, a lot of them you can upscale. So if you would like to chase Cylons around at 2x resolution, you can certainly do it on the RG556. Emulating PlayStation 2 games, of course PlayStation 1 is no problem for this handheld. But games look pretty good on this handheld. So just let's get into the more or less review part of this video. So after using the handheld for a while, I'm just going to unplug it from the capture card here. Go back to the main menu. So what are the good points of this handheld? Well, one of the main things, the screen is still awesome. I have liked the screen more the more I've used it. It's kind of hard to see on, of course, the video camera, but it is very clear. It has a very good color reproduction. Of course, black levels being an OLED screen are great. If you can play a game on this system, if it'll run right, then this is a good system to play it on because it will look gorgeous. 1080p, and they actually really did use a nice screen for this handheld, so I still love that. It's still comfortable. It's got controls in a good place for playing a lot of PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 analog games. If you're heavy into D-pad use, maybe the D-pad's not in an ideal location for older style, NES type games, Super Nintendo, that sort of thing. But if you're into more of the later systems, PlayStation Portable, PS1, PS2, things like that, then the control layout is pretty great for this. Joysticks themselves aside, they are put in a good place. The triggers, they feel good. They work pretty well. They are analog triggers. You do have to enable Xbox mode for them to work correctly, so just something I think I mentioned in the last video. But I'm still really happy with the control layout. The handheld, obviously, since you saw me hooked it to the capture card. And by the way, if there was any delay in that, in the audio, in the little gameplay segment we had a minute ago, it's probably due to my capture card. Oh, did I say capture? I meant to say capture card. So I have noticed that occasionally that capture card just introduces lag in there, and I haven't really figured it out because it's random. And so I haven't been able to diagnose what's going on there. So if any of my videos show a little bit of audio lag, it's the card and not the handheld. So we do have video out over USB-C. Of course, we got a headphone jack like most of these handhelds do. But the video out over USB-C is a nice improvement for Anbernic because some of their last handhelds, the T618 based handhelds, didn't really have any video out, which is kind of a disadvantage if you want to use that every now and then. It's not a deal breaker, but it is nice to see video output back and over USB-C. So those are the things I still really like about this system. Now, I do have some nitpicks after having used this system for a little while. So we'll talk about them. One thing, the speaker location. Speakers are here. It's not exactly ideal because kind of your hand masks some of the volume, so these speakers are not as loud and clear as you might like. You know, a lot of these cheaper handhelds do have the same issues with speaker placement. They're not in an ideal location. So it's something that's pretty common across the board with these handhelds. But you know, that's why I put that under nitpick. A lot of other handhelds have the same problem. One that doesn't actually is the Odin, which has its top firing speakers, which, you know, sounds really nice and clear on those. But you know, the bottom firing speakers are not really something I wouldn't buy the handheld over. One other nitpick I noticed is if you can see on the camera, this is where the power button is, and this is the volume control. And one nitpick I have here is it is far too easy to hit the power button when you're trying to turn the volume down. And there's not really a lot of, you know, tactile feedback here. The power button is slightly recessed, but not very. So if you're just pushing up here with your finger to turn the volume down, then it's way too easy to, you know, put the handheld to sleep by mistake when you're just trying to adjust the volume. And like I said, this is a nitpicky thing, but on a handheld like the Odin, the button is much more recessed, even though it's actually near, and I happen to have the Odin nearby. So even though the power button on the Odin is still pretty near the volume controls, it's very easy to tell with your finger which one is which. And the Anbernic, yeah, I wish they would have done something different, either put the volume button in a different place or just made it so that it was really obvious just from touching the buttons which one is volume and which one is power down. Because I have done that way too many times on my 556. So I would certainly say that, you know, that is something that bothered me. You know, whether it bothers you, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I'll put that under nitpicks just because it's, for the most part, a relatively minor thing, but it might bug you, and it's just something I've noticed using the handheld for a little while. So I should probably talk about the bad points of this handheld now. So the nitpicky things, it's like, these are probably not make or break for whether or not you want to purchase. But I do have some cons here. One thing I did notice is the handheld, this one doesn't seem to really support fast charging. It takes a while to charge up, even if you hook it to a fast charger. And I noticed this when I accidentally left the Switch emulator, you know, running in the background, and I hit sleep, and the Switch emulator just does not like to sleep very well. So it ended up sucking my battery down. When I came back and picked the handheld up again, it was at like 10%. And it took forever to recharge back up. I mean, and I've gotten kind of spoiled by fast charging handhelds like, you know, the Odin 2. The Odin 2 has a huge battery and it supports fast charging, so it's really quick to recharge if you need to do it. Of course, the nice thing about the Odin is you don't have to recharge very much. But I did notice this handheld kind of charges really slowly when it needs it. So definitely give yourself some time for recharge if you're going to need to recharge it every now and then. Battery life is actually pretty good, but if you do need to recharge it, you're going to wait a while. Now, another thing I noticed that I consider a bad point here, and I don't notice it on the Odin 2, for example, is that if you want to transfer files via USB, like a lot of cheap Android devices, file transfer can be kind of hit and miss. On a more expensive device, about the only thing that limits you is the cable. But a lot of these cheap Android devices, kind of, if you want to copy something to the internal memory, or you want to copy without taking out your USB card, which is a little aggravating, taking it out behind this door, then I've noticed that the Anbernic, if you want to copy one or two files, will work fine, but if you want to copy a fair amount of stuff, the file transfer over USB is not that reliable on cables that I know are good. So it's not like I'm using bad cables. I use the same cables I would use with my Odin, and I get flawless file transfer. And on the Anbernic, it kind of chokes on them every now and then. So it'll lose the USB connection or what have you. And I've noticed this on a lot of the cheaper Android devices, not just handhelds, but stuff like the Kindle Fire is kind of notorious for this. So yeah, it's not surprising that file transfer over USB can be kind of iffy on this device, but it's still a little disappointing. Particularly, and I'll probably say this quite a few times during this little video review, I've gotten kind of spoiled by the Odin 2. Odin 2, it just works. Now, the joysticks, I definitely put this underneath the con. They're not bad, but they're also not good. They're a little bit too sensitive, probably because of the size. These so-called switch sticks are all about the same in that. And if you've used a handheld with better joysticks like the Odin or the Steam Deck or something like that, then you will probably notice that these are not as good. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a deal breaker. I have heard that you can buy replacement sticks if you really think it's a problem. And for most games, when I'm holding this in a normal position instead of for a video stream like this, I don't really have a problem with it. But I do think for what's nominally Anbernic's flagship handheld, they should have, instead of putting these little lights around the joystick, just given us a little bit better quality joysticks. So, not really a deal breaker, but I think it's more than a nitpick. So this is why I'm putting this under what's bad. It's like, yeah, they needed to do better. This is 2024. And this is not their bottom end handheld either. This is their fancy one with the fancy screen that has a higher price. So should be a little better. Now, of course, the elephant in the room with the Anbernic 556 really is the processor limitations. So the processor is not as strong as what you would find in the Odin. This ain't no Snapdragon. It's not as strong as what you would find in one of the competitor handhelds, the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. It's more comparable to the regular Retroid Pocket 4, but it is not nearly as strong as the processor in the 4 Pro. And you will notice that when you start to run the more difficult to run PlayStation 2 games. So things like the Champions of Norath games are not going to run well on this. Dragon Quest is okay, but you will notice some slowdowns every now and then. I haven't been able to perfectly eliminate slowdowns. You don't see those kind of things on the Odin and the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but you'll see some of the processor limitations here, particularly if you want to do upscaling. And there are some games that will run fine at 1x resolution, but then you kind of lose the benefit of having the nice 1080p screen if you're still running at PlayStation native resolution. So I do consider the processor here probably to be the weakest point of this console. In fact, if I was allowed to change one thing and one thing only about the RG556, I would put the processor in here that they have in the Pocket 4 Pro. Just something a little bit stronger to handle some of those games that you probably want to at least run slightly upscale to take advantage of this screen. So the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro has a crappy screen but a better processor. This one has an excellent screen, but a crappier processor. Now, if the game you want will run fine, and there are plenty of videos out there, I have some videos on my channel. There's another channel called For the Next. He has demonstrated tons of games running on this handheld. So you can see very easily before you want to make a purchase if the processor is too limiting for you. So most PS2 will run fine. You will have to do maybe a little bit of tweaking, but unlike the previous generation of handhelds where only a few PS2 games would run good, this one will handle most of them. But there are games that will certainly show the limitation of the weaker processor in this thing. Now, the other limitation I want to mention here, something I actually discovered fairly recently. I saw a Reddit post mentioning that someone was having trouble getting the RG556 to work with their dock because they wanted to do a little video output while powering the handheld and maybe hooking up a controller at the same time. And the Odin 2 that I have has no problem doing this, and I haven't even thought of doing it on the RG556 because if I'm going to dock, I may as well use the Odin. But I did try it out. I tried it out with several docks, 3 different docks, all of which worked perfectly fine on the Odin, and one of them was a Switch dock, so of course it worked perfectly well on the Switch. And I was able to, on those other handhelds, as well as my Anbernic Win600, who is recording this video right now, all of those docks work perfectly well on all of those devices. Only when I plugged them into here, I could do one of two things. I could either charge the device or use the video outputs and ports. I could not use both at the same time. So if I plugged in the dock without plugging in, say, the external AC adapter, I could actually use the video output, but I couldn't charge the handheld. If I plugged in the power adapter to the dock first and plugged it in, then the only thing this handheld would do is charge. And I could not find anything in the settings menu that would change that behavior. So by the way, if you know the trick that I'm missing, please leave it for me in the comments, because I'd like to know how to do this if it's even possible with the RG556 currently. So for the moment, I'm chalking this up to either a hardware limitation or probably more likely something funky in Anbernic's Android distribution that's making this not work when it works on, my Odin just perfectly fine and my other devices. It's just the RG556 at the moment, again, unless I'm missing something, does not seem to be able to function properly with the dock. So you can either charge or do external video, but you don't seem to be able to do both at once. And again, like I said, I've tried this with several docks. If someone knows the secret, please let me know in the comments, because I really would like to know if it's something I'm missing or whether it is the handheld itself. So if you plan on using the handheld docked, I would recommend buying a different handheld, one that we know that works with docks. And I don't really consider this a deal breaker for me because I never intended to use this handheld as a docked console. I mean, if I really want to do that with a handheld, I've got my Odin 2. And honestly, the best solution if you want to play games on the TV and you want to do some emulation is just go ahead and buy one of those mini PCs. They're not that expensive. They're not really that much more than these handhelds most of the time. And they just do the job of emulation a lot better. So, I mean, the dock is not a deal breaker for me, but it is something that I noticed that I definitely consider a drawback of this handheld, that apparently it just doesn't function properly with docks. So, we'll definitely put that in the disadvantages or what's bad column here. So, just to kind of sum up, let's compare the Anbernic with the competition. So we have the Anbernic here, you have the Odin, and hey, we can get a size competition with some of this stuff. So here's the Anbernic. I'll put it over here so it doesn't get too much glare. Here's the Odin 2. You can see they're actually fairly similar in size, although the Odin 2 is way heavier and way thicker if you hold it up like this. So control layout is pretty similar, but the Odin, of course, is chunkier. It has a bigger battery, and of course it costs more. But the advantages in the Odin, other than the screen, the Odin does everything the RG556 does better. So anything the RG556 can do will work better on the Odin. And if money is no object and you don't mind that the Odin doesn't have an OLED screen, get the Odin. I mean, just worth it. It works better. It's faster. It runs all the games that are trouble that the RG556 and, for that matter, the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro don't really run well. Now, I don't have a Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but just for the size comparison, I do have a Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, which is almost the same size as the 4 Pro, so you can see that it's a little bigger, the RG556. The screen is actually a good bit bigger, and the advantage, of course, you get with the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is you get a little bit more power. You pay a little bit more for it. Now, the Anbernic's list price is $189, but I have seen the Anbernic. I bought mine for $175 because I pre-ordered it. But I've seen deals through Anbernic's eBay store and online. You can probably pick up the RG556 for $150, $160 if you look around. So, you know, the $189 list price isn't probably what you'll actually pay unless you just order it direct from Anbernic's website. You can find this handheld usually cheaper. The Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is, I think, pretty much $199. I haven't really seen too many deals on that one. And, of course, the Odin, you know, $299 for the base model. And actually, if you're going to buy an Odin, I would recommend just buying the base. The only thing you really lose is you lose some RAM, but if you're not into Switch emulation, if you're doing PS2, it's not going to make any difference at all. And the only other thing you lose by buying the Odin base is you only get to get black. You don't get the other choices, color choices, if you're buying the base model. Now, would I recommend the RG556? Sure. Particularly if you can get it for less than the list price of $189, and I really like using this handheld. I do love the screen. I like the screen on this RG556, actually better than the Odin screen. The Odin has a pretty good screen, but it's not OLED, and it doesn't do blacks as well as the Anbernics. You can't really see this on a video, so I'm not going to try to do a comparison on the camera. But if you're looking at it in person, you know, the RG556 has a really nice screen. If I could swap the screen to the Odin, we might have the perfect retro handheld. Now, the Retroid Pockets, I don't. The reason I didn't buy a Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is that I had the Retroid 3. They did improve the joysticks, but I really don't like the layout of the controls on the Retroid Pocket 4s. So that's actually why I didn't buy it, because I just didn't like the handheld, the way it felt for the Pocket 3 Plus. So I'm figuring, well, I'm never going to use it anyway, so I'm not going to buy the Retroid Pocket 4. Should you? That just depends on whether the control layout bothers you or not, as much as it bothered me. They did improve the joysticks. They are better. In fact, the joysticks on, I think, the Pocket 4 and the Pocket 4 Pro are probably better than the ones on this Anbernic handheld. But then you have to deal with a much lower resolution and smaller screen. And, you know, I think that the screen is a very important part of the handheld, and the screen on the Anbernic and on the Odin just basically curb stomps what you'll find in a Retroid Pocket 4 or 4 Pro. I mean, the 4 Pro and the 4 just have, well, I'm just going to come out and say it, a bad screen. You know, it was good maybe 10 years ago, but now we expect better. Certainly for a handheld, for the 4 Pro, you're going to pay $200 for. So the advantage, though, you get with the 4 Pro is it will run PlayStation 2 Switch games better than the RG556. Doesn't come up to the level of the Odin, but it does do PlayStation 2 better than this. And if your criteria is you have a lot of hard-to-run PlayStation 2 games, but you don't want to spring for the Odin, then the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro will probably scratch that itch, and it would be a good purchase. Again, if you can get by the control locations on those handhelds and the fact that the screen is just not great. So you can run them better, but you can't upscale them like you can on an Odin. You can try, but the screen's not going to cooperate very well. So, in terms of my handheld recommendations, like I said, if you can get the Odin, get the Odin. If money is not an object here and you can reasonably afford to pay the $299, then it's probably the best currently available Android emulation handheld that you can buy. The RG556 is another good choice. It's probably get it for a lot less money, particularly if you can find it on sale, and it is pretty commonly on sale. It has a great screen, and it has good positioning for later retro games like your PlayStation type games. So I would certainly recommend that. If you need a little bit more oomph, maybe consider the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but you're going to pay a little bit more for that. And I get back to, well, if I'm going to pay $200 anyway, I may as well just go ahead and get the Odin 2. Now, the Retroid Pocket is certainly smaller. It will fit in a smaller bag. I don't consider any of these devices, if you've seen my other video, I don't consider any of these devices to be pocketable. Certainly not the RG556, which I didn't have when I made that video. But, not really a pocketable device. So, to me, size doesn't matter that much. But you can certainly fit the Retroids into a smaller bag, which is how I carried this one around. I would carry it around in a protective case inside my bag, which is the same thing I do with these. So, I would certainly recommend the RG556. It does have some limitations, but it is fun to use. It is nice to play around with, and I've certainly enjoyed having mine. I think it was a worthwhile purchase. If for nothing else, for playing old PlayStation games scaled up on a 1080p OLED screen. For PlayStation, you don't have to worry about the CPU limitations. Upscale to your heart's content. And those games look great on the screen here. So I'm really happy with my purchase. I do recommend it on that. But again, it does have limitations. It is not the perfect Android handheld, but it is a pretty good one for what they ask for it. So we'll end the video here. Thank you for watching if you've made it all the way to the end. If you have any comments or questions, certainly leave me a comment. And I hope to see you again on the next video.